Right. Louisa and Alison from the National Trust. Not an institution, the National Trust, just something very dear to our hearts. When I first met these guys at the very beginning of the project, it's having done NAV for 20 years and done retail and all that, I've never come across a situation where they were facing challenges like the lady in Beatrix Potter's Cottage uses a shoebox to collect money and writes times of tours on the back of Post-it notes. Running cables to places which you couldn't do because there was grade 2 listed rose bushes or something.
Badgers.
Badgers. Always badgers.
Bats.
They're buggers, aren't they, badgers? And my favourite one was, so being a scout leader, we go to Brownsea Island quite a lot, which you guys own. Yes. The problem is Brownsea Island doesn't have wired broadband, so it gets broadcast from the hospital on the mainland, but twice a day a ferry goes past and cuts the broadband connection. So, as an IT challenge, it's quite interesting because it's like, okay, we've never had to deal with stuff like this before. So, it has been an amazing honour and a lot of fun working with the National Trust. The nicest people you will ever do business with. And I apologise to all our other customers here, but honestly, it's the National Trust. So, ladies, it's all yours.
Thank you, Matt. So I'm just going to start off by giving you a little introduction to the National Trust and then talk through how we've used NAV to implement our commercial strategy as an organisation. I'll show you some of the screenshots and talk you through some of the processes at a very high level. And then I'll hand over to Alison, who will talk you through how we're using NAV to support our distribution centre for our retail shops, and also how we're using mobile NAV and stock manager to enable our properties to perform activities like receipting goods and stock counting. How does it work? There we go. Okay, so the National Trust was established in 1895. This is an extract from the Act. I'm not going to read it out to you. I'll leave it up to you guys to read that. But the Act was a very important thing. It established the organisation and gave us the right to hold land and property inalienably, which means that it can never, ever be sold. So we have an obligation as a charity to hold on to that property, protect it, conserve it, and make sure that we give access to people so that they can enjoy it. Those photos are some of my favourite sites, the National Trust. I live in the southwest. So we've got Killerton on the far left, Stourhead, most beautiful garden. This time of year is just stunning with autumn colours. Tinsfield, which was quite a recent acquisition of ours, just south of Bristol, and Kynance Cove, which is an amazingly beautiful beach in Cornwall. So our journey with NAV. When I started this programme, it was 3.5 years ago. That's when I first started to write the business case to try and persuade the trustees of the charity to invest £20 million in new IT systems, new processes, and new tills. We had a very old, antiquated stock management system that we used for our retail business. We had a very clunky, rubbish catering and procurement system, which we used to manage our recipes out at properties. About 200 of our shops and restaurants didn't even have access to that technology, so they literally operate using spreadsheets and manual bits of paper. We've got about 1,400 tills out in our properties at the moment and about 800 outlets. So that's shops, cafes, restaurants, and visitor reception buildings where we charge admission and sell membership. We've got completely manual processes to record our income across admissions, retail, and catering. So really antiquated processes, lots of hands getting involved, loads of data inaccuracies, and just mountains and mountains of paperwork. So what we wanted, our ambition, was one integrated solution that we could use to manage our retail, catering, and admissions businesses. We wanted to be able to achieve efficiencies by having one system, which meant that we could use our staff across different areas of the business. At the moment, we have defined retail teams, catering teams, and admissions teams. Our ambition was to have one solution that helped us be a lot more flexible in terms of our workforce planning. We also wanted fully integrated stock management, so to enable our distribution centre to work on the same systems as our shops, because in the past it didn't, so that we had real visibility of where our stock was, where it needed to go, and how quickly we could get it there. And finally, touchscreen tills and tablets, which were integrated from the point of recognizing a sale through the solution and into our finance system. That was just revolutionary for us as an organization. So the circle in the center describes the National Trust strategy as a whole. So we start off by wanting to engage our supporters. We want to build long-term relationships with our members so that we can achieve greater lifetime value with them and encourage them to spend more money, because we need to generate funds to pay for the work that we do. In addition, as a charity, we need to make sure that we use our resources and skills effectively. We are limited in terms of our funding, and we have a huge amount of obligations to meet our core purpose. At the moment, our backlog, which is the amount of money we need to spend on restoring houses, regenerating land, and protecting what we own, is about £300 to £400 million. So there's a big hole in our accounts. We need to find a way to close the gap a bit by reducing our costs and using our resources more effectively. And then finally, improving conservation. So that is the heart of what we do. It's not just about historic houses. We were set up originally to provide spaces of green land so that poor could get spiritual refreshment. So we're absolutely focused a lot more now on making sure that we're protecting landscape and protecting nature and trying to encourage sustainable farming and much better land management across where we operate and beyond our boundaries, in fact. So the commercial strategy at the Trust has been designed around these three core elements of the organisation strategy. First of all, conservation, embedding our cause. It's really fundamental to us that we source our food responsibly. We have soil association accreditation for the majority of our cafes to show that we're sourcing organic food. And we also want to encourage better practices on our land. We have 630,000 acres of land that we own, much of which is farmed by tenants. What we want to make sure is that we're supporting our tenants in farming more sustainably and sourcing products from them. So a lot of the apple juice and other products that we sell in our cafes come from our tenants. So we use NAV to control how we procure and source products in terms of approving new suppliers and the products that they sell us so that we know where they come from and we can prove their provenance. In terms of building our brand and engaging our supporters, it's really important to us that we provide good quality, consistent food. So we have a set of recipes which are used nationally now called the cookbook, and we use NAV to enable the cookbook. So I'll show you a slide in terms of how we set menus up, but it enables us to control the recipes that the properties are offering so that we know we've got consistent offering across every outlet. In terms of profitability and efficiency, absolutely 100%. The objectives behind implementing NAV were to put in good, consistent processes, good technology that enabled us to be a lot more efficient and effective, to give us much better MI so we could understand the business, where it was failing, where it was doing well, and make sure that we could drive it forward. Also, compliance is very important to us. So compliance with those processes. As an organisation, mandatory processes and use of systems is a very new thing to us. So we wanted to make sure that we could use NAV in such a way to make sure that our property staff were doing what we wanted them to do. And finally, developing our people. Again, it's about efficient processes. It's about using technology so that we can get our heads up and away from the paperwork, out on the shop floor, giving much better customer service and engaging much more with our supporters, thereby increasing their lifetime value and improving our relationship with them. So the most fundamental thing for us when we selected NAV, we had an RFP process. We started off with 30 different suppliers, got down to a short list of 8. what was really important to us, and the reason why we chose NAV with the NAV people, was the user interface is so simple and straightforward. It felt familiar to our staff who already use Outlook, and they also use Windows phones. So the idea of the tiles was really straightforward and simple for them to get their heads around. So that was very important for us. So this is an example of a role center for a catering team. In terms of what they can see, you can see their menus, their recipes, their ingredients. So it's how they manage their activities on NAV on a day-to-day basis. In terms of food sourcing, every single product that we buy, every single supplier that we buy from goes through a process using NAV to approve them so that the central team can approve every single item that we sell. There's quite a significant overhead in working this way, but it's fundamental to us to protect our reputation and our brand so that we know we're not selling horse meat in cottage pie or some other hideous product that's been shipped over from China. So it's fundamental that we manage this and we use NAV to enable that to happen. In terms of efficient processes, this is an example of a retail role center. So for the first time in implementing NAV, we've put in a proper procurement process, i.e. raising a purchase order, receipting the goods, and then matching the invoice. Now, I'm an accountant by trade, so for me, the concept of three-way matching is incredibly exciting. And it's something that we've desperately needed for a long time at the National Trust. We had very little control over what we were spending and where we were purchasing. So implementing NAV has really enabled us to improve that process, many times over. We went live with NAV in September, and looking at the first month's results of the invoices that we've had through, 69% have automatically matched. So Alison's going to talk a little bit more about invoice matching later on. But that's huge in terms of efficiency for us and the setup that we've got. Of the 31% that didn't, it's mainly due to process compliance, so our property teams getting used to using the new system, not raising a purchase order, or not receipting the goods in time before the invoice arrived. So we're doing a lot of work around that at the moment, but we were pretty chuffed that 69% of the invoices were scanned in, automatically matched, and went straight off to payment. That's a huge win for us. In terms of our food offer, this is an example of a cookbook menu that's set up. So the way that we manage it is we have a number of different dishes and a number of different slots in the menu, and this is all controlled through NAV. So each of the properties are given a classification which enables them to have a different amount of flexibility in the menu that they choose, depending on how big they are and how competent they are. So our really big cafes like Stourhead, which turns over £1 million a year, has a lot more flexibility in terms of offering more local dishes than perhaps a small outlet that turns over £10,000 a year. So the property teams go through and select the core menu items that they need to have, and then they're able to build in their own local recipes. So this is an example of a recipe, a Victoria sandwich. One of the reasons why managing and controlling recipes is so important to us is that in our previous system there was no control. Each property set up their own recipes, and we got to the point where when we started data cleansing for this for the transition and the data migration into NAV, we had over 60,000 recipes across the National Trust. Many of them duplicates. So Victoria Sponge is a prime example. We had 444 different versions of a Victoria Sponge recipe. So it was just chaos, really poor data quality, really bad MI coming out of it. So this way, every recipe that's set up, again, has to go to the central team for approval. If it's too similar to something we've already got, they won't approve it. So we're really trying to manage our data and the quality through using NAV. So my last slide, and then I'll hand over to Alison, is really around the compliance side of things. So as I've said, this is massive cultural change for the National Trust. We've never told people they have to do things in a certain way before. We've never enforced that they have to use a system. So it's really important to us that we're able to monitor what they're doing and work with them gently at first. We may get a little tougher later on, but to make sure that they're using the system effectively and following the processes. Because if they do, and we get that invoice matching process right, it's just so straightforward and efficient for all of us. So we do weekly reporting now to look at who's using the system, what are they doing, what's the time difference between when they receipt their goods and raise their purchase order, have we got goods being receipted after invoices are received, etc. So we use JET reporting to enable us to do that, which is incredibly helpful and is really giving us a very good sense very quickly as to how well people are getting to grips with using the system. Finally, we use NAV to manage supplier compliance as well. So things like making sure that the temperature is correct when a chilled delivery is made, that the time and date of the delivery is correct. So all of this is functionality that the property can record using mobile NAV when they receipt their deliveries in. And it's really important. We now have data on our suppliers. We have a lot of national and regional suppliers. So for the first time, we can start to monitor their performance and manage it and push them to improve the service they're giving our properties. Okay, Alison.
Okay, so I'm going to carry on with the theme really of Louisa's, is that what NAV has really given us is the ability to see what's going on in the National Trust and the ability to start adding controls in to have a much more consistent approach to the way that we manage things overall. From a retail side, it's quite unique in the National Trust in the way that they manage the sort of the supply chain. So they've got various options, they do a lot of central ordering, which they then distribute to properties. The properties themselves do ordering based on their local requirements, and also there's central purchasing, which are delivered direct to store as well. So there's a fair few processes that NAV brings together for us and gives us the visibility around that. Around it. We've got one missing here, so supply and distribution. So I think you've got my old slides.
Oh no!
But I will keep talking, and we'll see. But what NAV does do with the various tiles we've got is give a central view around what's happening both centrally and to the properties as well. We use a mixture of NAV and mobile NAV to manage the distribution and logistics. So within the distribution centre, we predominantly use NAV for the supervisor role. And what's given us for the first time is visibility of actually what's going on within the centre. So before, everything was very much paper-based. Things were printed off and distributed without really keeping an eye on what it was. So things like picks to different properties. Bearing in mind we have over 400 properties that we deliver to on a regular basis, the management of that work was difficult, shall we say. What NAV has given us is the ability to see what's going on in the distribution centre, allow us to use mobile scanners as well within the operations. So now we have people walking the floor and doing work rather than picking up a piece of paper, doing something, walking back. And also around performance as well. We can see how people are working, and we can we've already had conversations with people in the month that we've had NAV in around the amount of work that they're doing as they're going through the distribution centre. Now this will be the test. Oh, we have this one. That's okay. So this is just an example of what a supervisor can see within the distribution centre now. So this is just an example of all of the properties that we're picking for. But what it does do is give them a view of what needs to be picked, who's picking it, how much they've picked, and kind of how many items they're doing. Simple stuff, but something that they never had before. So the visibility, and you can see numbers moving as people are progressing through the day. This has had quite a significant impact, even now, around productivity and really around managing who's doing what and being able to allocate more quickly the work that we're doing. So what we've really gone from is the paper-based at the top through to using the scanners. One of the challenges that we've had in the DC is the average service length of someone in the DC is around about 20 years. So we have people who have never used computers before, don't want to use computers at all. But what the scanner has done, it's a very easy thing to use. And even those that were particularly negative about the prospect of using technology are very much up for it. I go to the DC and I have people coming showing me now what they've been doing, which is quite exciting when they wouldn't talk to me before. But what we've had is every activity now from an operator can be done via a device. And that device is being monitored back at the control centre, if you like, as well, so that we can see what's happening as well within the warehouse without having to always be on the floor. So it's providing us with the ability to book goods in very simply, to do the quality control elements, to do the movements through the warehouse as well, and to make decisions on those movements as well where we need to, and obviously the picking as well of the staff as well. And they are always showing me how they scan the bins or the aisle, the bin, and showing me how quick it works. They're quite excited about the technology. Sorry, I'm having. The other thing that it is doing, so the logistics of the DC. This is given a whole new view of what's happening within distribution across the National Trust. So for the first time, we've got good route planning. It uses the volumetrics based on what we've got within the DC, and we can create routes based on volumetrics. The challenges that we've got as a distribution centre is that we've got various properties we need to deliver to. Some are down cobbled streets, some are down country tracks. It's not your normal, we can have a whole load of big lorries and we can just go and deliver. We have to, we have to scale it to the property and the type of property. So we've got some things going out in small courier vans, some going out in larger vans, and this has enabled us to do better planning to make use of the space that we've got for the areas that we need to go to. What it also does, though, is once the DC have picked and shipping stuff, it's now given visibility to our central team around what's been distributed. So previously they couldn't see what was going out, if you like, in a week to the properties. And then from a property perspective, for the first time, they're getting a heads up on what's being delivered, which they couldn't see before. Within the implementation, that's provided us with a few challenges because obviously as the DC was learning to do the picking, they weren't perhaps as quick as we wanted them to be. When you create the routes, the properties could see that they were going to get the goods, but then when you finally ship them, some of the items wouldn't be there because they sort of missed the timing. We're over that bit now, but it was an interesting time around properties ringing up saying, I was expecting this and I haven't got it. It's gone missing somewhere. Well, actually, it hadn't gone missing. But the whole cultural change of being able to see all of this data is fairly significant, and I think people are still getting used to the idea that everything is very visible now, and they can see it. It's provided significant benefits as well for us in working with properties, especially sort of coming up this time of year to Christmas as well, in being able to, a phone call to us to say we haven't got enough stock, we can see what's in their back cupboard and the fact that they might be hoarding stuff, and have the appropriate conversations with them. So just going to talk a little bit around, so what I've spoken about is really so far is around the central side and the way that stock is moved from through the central team to properties. What NAV also gives us is this whole inventory management piece and sort of a cyclical cycle. So we've got our properties are involved in the setup of vendors and items, but now in a controlled environment, so we can actually see what people are wanting to buy. The use of P cards has gone out of the window, so they haven't got the ability now to go round the back door. And through the migration process, I think we found round about 2,000 suppliers that we didn't even know about. So they were being paid via P cards or other routes. Some were even being paid by petty cash from a box. What NAV has given us is the ability to bring all of that in and the control to see it. What it also is from a retail perspective is starting to think strategically around what we want to sell, and then have those conversations with properties who might sell, for example. One example we did have was a range of chocolate. A shop wanted to sell 20 different types of chocolate just to give the customer choice. The fact that they only ever sold four types of chocolate was, we can now have those conversations with people because we can see what's happening with it and with the data. So all of the properties, they're involved within the vendor and item setup for their local products. They raise purchase orders. They receipt those purchase orders, and obviously they then are involved in the invoice matching process. So they receipt them. The invoice should go through automatically. If they don't receipt them, or there are anomalies within those invoices coming in, then they pick them up and they work them through to approval. That resulting in a passing to our payment system where the suppliers are obviously paid. The key for me is around the fact that we've now for the first time got our food and beverage, our catering element and our retail element working under the same system. So where they need to, the processes are the same. But what NAV also gives us is the flexibility to manage these the differences within the business in a way that meets the requirements of the National Trust. It's also enabled us from a supplier perspective. There are suppliers that in the past have been treated separately, who provide goods to catering and to retail. We're now able to see who those are, and then obviously put processes in place to manage them more effectively as a whole. So stock management, this is a pretty key one for our properties. So as the introduction said, our technology is sometimes quite a challenge for us. And the fact that we've had to, constraints around systems and needing to be near the system or the PC to do work has provided us with challenges, and also focusing in lots of properties. We've got everything around the admissions area because that's where the PCs are and sits. What this now gives us is the ability to move around the property to manage the stock effectively. So purchase orders, internal receipts, stock counts, and adjustments can all be dealt with through the stock manager, which has provided a lot more flexibility to us. It's enabled us to introduce a system to all properties. Let's say irrespective, or most properties. I don't think we've got a property that we haven't been able to implement NAV into. So we've found a way of managing the infrastructure and the mobile. The stock manager has supported us in doing that. That's my presentation. I guess, is there any questions for either of us that anyone wants to raise?
Well, I started the project 3.5 years ago to write the business case. We went through supplier selection, took us almost a year. We signed our contracts in July 2014. We've gradually been working through. We've had some challenges, so we didn't contract directly with TNP. We went through another organisation, and there have been delays on the way. We're about a year behind where we hoped we would be. But NAV went live in September. We just put our first retail till into our head office shop today, which was very exciting. So I bought a book through it before I came here today. And the till rollout will start from March the 1st next year and go for a year, and will be finished by the end of February 2018. So a bit of a long slog, but we are a very unusual organisation with incredibly complex locations and requirements. So
data's been a big challenge as well. So actually pulling all of the data together from various systems, paper, spreadsheets, suppliers, has been a mammoth task.
Yeah, so there's a question at the back there. So we put in place something called an operational assurance group. So it's a group of representative people from across different roles, different properties, all over the countries that we operate in. And they have worked with us throughout, from developing business requirements through to designing the processes, looking at the system, testing it, and signing it off. We then had another group of people who worked with us doing UAT. But the change management has been a massive challenge. That ops assurance group enabled the business to accept credibility that it was their own signing off the system, which was really important to us. And then we have, I've been out on the road. We've run so many road shows and workshops and loads of engagement. When we went live in September, we had some challenges and some difficult decisions about whether to actually press the go button or not, as you always do with projects like this. But the organisation was so up for it. I've never seen anything like it. They were so ready. They were chomping at the bit to be able to get hold of this system and start using it. And I think partly that's because what they had before was just so crap. And the thought of something new that might actually work was really inspiring for them. But yeah, it's been a big challenge, just huge amounts of engagements. The Trust is a very consultative organisation. So, I spend probably 95% of my working week in meetings, talking about stuff and engaging with people. But it works, and it's really helped us get to a point where, the system's being used pretty well, considering we've got staff from 20 years old to 80-year-old volunteers who might be using the system to label product or receipting goods. So wide-ranging group of people to get to use it. We've also put a hypercare team in place. So after go live, we had about 16 people answering phones, and that's been absolutely critical. Most of the calls are confidence building. How do I do this? I'm just about to do this and press this button. Is this right? Or we've had some issues with data that have needed to be sorted out. But the hypercare was really important, just to hold people's hands through the transition, and we're still operating that now.
But I think the scale of the change is fairly significant to the organisation. but you look at the number of queries coming in. From a personal perspective, I'm surprised they aren't more. And I think part of that is the fact that it's very easy to use. So, people are trying and using it and then ringing up and asking questions. And, I think the effort involved in engaging with people has actually got leaps and bounds, isn't it, now, for